Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Anil, and thank you to Indian Television for this great opportunity to present to you all this first edition of VinNet, and congratulations on the launch of this event. So just briefly, in the presentation today, I'm just going to share a few perspectives on what's happening in digital video in Asia Pacific, some global markets as well, and also dwelling quite a bit on the Indian market, and what are some of the learnings we see in the nascent development in some of the emerging markets around Asia and around the world. So look, if you broadly look at the video market today in Asia Pacific, and Asia Pacific is very disparate, but for the purposes of simplicity, we're putting 15 to 16 markets together. And you know, you look at television, which is free to air, and pay TV, and then OTT together, revenues are coming in at $120 billion today for that region. And that's grown at a trajectory of about 9 to 10% over the last 5 years. Television, of course, is still dominant, but that share of digital or online video, which was only about 1 or 2% 5 years ago, has doubled to more than 11% and is going to double again over the next 5 years to more than 22%. The pace of growth in linear video segment is obviously slowing down in certain markets, and so you see the overall ecosystem growth dragging down to about 6% over the next 5 years, more fragile growth. But within that segment, obviously, digital video is growing at a much higher rate. Now, more importantly, if you dissect that pie and you say, what is the incremental growth, the incremental new dollars that are being added to the content ecosystem over the next 5 years, every dollar earned from the region, and it's coming to the ecosystem, close to 60 cents is going to be going to digital, which is quite a significant chunk. And you can see where the incremental dollars are going on the right-hand side. It's different in different markets. In China and Japan, it's skewed heavily towards digital, and I'll discuss that. Australia, we've seen the growth of Netflix. Amazon's launching there soon. Has put a dent in the subscription market, though pay TV is still fairly strong. But what's happened is the traditional broadcasters, but now and over the next 5 years, are losing increasing amount of share on advertising share to players like YouTube and Facebook. So we're already seeing a big shift in Australia. In Korea, it's different because there, the telecom players and the cable players have merged, and they're doing different things, and they're launching TVOD services in their own. So a lot of the bigger telcos like SK and KT are launching SVOD services in their own. So most of the pie is still within the traditional segment. Southeast Asia is interesting because, like India, pay TV is very strong in certain markets like Malaysia, but in other markets, digital is growing. And that 18% share of digital in the next 5 years represents SVOD and AVOD, and much of it is taking share from the free-to-air segment. In India, as we see, obviously, traditional pay TV is very strong, but digital is growing. And as Anil said, it's very ad-driven at the moment. We're seeing the SVOD mechanism developing post the launch of Hotstar and other players, and we're going to discuss that later on. Now, in terms of mobile broadband growth, this is obviously the predominant form of internet distribution in Asia Pacific today. You can see the India segment there. Smartphones have really driven penetration in all of these markets with 4G and LTE coming in. And even in places like Indonesia and Thailand, it's growing substantially, and now, of course, in India. And really, in a lot of emerging markets, we're seeing the mobile broadband players integrate with some of the bigger OTTs, and I'm going to discuss that briefly later on. Fixed broadband networks are critical, and here we see a mix between some of the legacy LAN networks and some of the newer NGN networks, which really includes fiber to the home and cable DOCSIS, and those networks are really gaining scale. Of course, no surprise that Singapore, Korea, Japan, and to a certain extent China and Hong Kong are seeing a lot of growth, both in absolute terms and penetration. But NGN is yet to scale in a lot of emerging markets, particularly Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, but it's starting to. It's starting to grow quite significantly in Thailand and Malaysia, where there's a government mandate for national broadband networks. And even though we see a small penetration on the right-hand side in India, in absolute terms, it's quite significant, as millions of new broadband homes come through some of the players here, and we see that growing from a low base in the future. Now, the other key thing to remember is on the pricing segment, as Anil mentioned earlier, it's important to look at fixed broadband is still a very expensive proposition. And if you look at the true cost of SVOD OTT on top of the broadband business and relative to pay TV, it's still fairly expensive. So a lot of the players that we see, and we're obviously seeing this in India, are working on a very low pricing model, on a more flexible pricing model. Otherwise, you're pricing at the upper end, as Netflix has found, where you're just reaching an affluent elite, and you're really capping out at a very small niche penetration. Now, at the end of 2015, the whole online market in Asia was about $9 billion. $7 billion came from advertising, $2 billion, a little bit over that, came from subscription. By 2021, we're seeing this pie grow to around $35 billion, with 22 from advertising and about 13 from subscription. Now, if you look at India's share in that market over the next 5 years, it's going to be less than 5%. However, if you take out China, which is a massive part and has been going at it much longer, India's share is around 15 to 20%. So the opportunity ex-China for the region is actually $8 billion. And we're saying India in 5 years' time will be 1.2, 1.3, which is around 15%. So let's dwell a little bit more on India and then go to some of the other markets that we see as also important. So obviously we have a system, as Anil said, that's developing in parallel with television. Obviously with digitalization, which came in 2012, the digital base in India increased and it's expected to reach close to 90 million by the end of this year. However, in parallel, as the right-hand side shows, we've seen a really robust non-linear video ecosystem growing. Big declines in data tariffs, more of an uptake in smartphones and better speeds on the 3G. And now with the onset of 4G, you're seeing a steady uptick in data consumption. Now, India, like most of the markets in Asia that we're talking about, is obviously predominantly a wireless broadband market, with 3G and 4G services driving internet penetration. And such a construct of a broadband market really favors short-form content predominantly, with at least 85% of the smartphone viewers consuming under 10 minutes of video. And there are mutual benefits. More need to happen, as Anil mentioned, between stakeholders to foster an ad-dependent OTT ecosystem. As some of the telco revenues are getting more and more dependent on data, there's really a push for more integration with online video services. Content owners and broadcasters, some of them through their own OTT platforms, are starting to slowly attract slightly better CPMs and yields from advertisers who are looking for a targeted reach. And of course, the consumers are latching on to free curated services with the convenience of viewing across multi-screens. So just to quantify a little bit more, we think the online video market in India, after currency conversion, the total market closed at about $135 million last year, dollars. YouTube, of course, accounts for the majority share of that. But last year was characterized by a rollout of multiple services, whether it was Eros Now or Hotstar, followed by Voot and Uzi this year. So we're seeing that pie grow at least 40% per annum over the next 5 years to become $1 billion plus opportunity. A lot of the global social media giants with growing franchises and businesses in India are so well distributed and integrated across the online ecosystem, and they're going to continue a significant chunk of that pie. However, a lot of the content companies that are able to leverage their local IP and media ownership can carve out a really sizable market share through their own branded services. And we're seeing that through some of the players that you have on the board today that are run by broadcast mainers who are starting to leverage their TV viewers and command higher CPMs and premium sponsorships. Now on SVOD, we're still a subscale market. As Anil mentioned, there's obviously a lack of payment infrastructure, and that's a big problem in other markets in Southeast Asia. But one can draw parallels from the e-commerce industry, where 60% of the transactions today are cash on delivery. Most of the existing OTT offerings really lack any significant exclusive content, but that's changing quickly. And already close to 20% of broadband internet subscribers in India enjoy speeds in excess of 4 meg, which is really kind of dilutes some of the experience to consume long-form premium content such as movies. Now, in the medium term, we do see some promises for the growth of SVOD, anchored to the recent growth in the number of digital wallet users, which has really outpaced the number of credit card users. And we're seeing OTT integration with a number of the telcos, which are going to take care of the payment hurdles. And as Anil mentioned, SASE pricing and the TVOD market is also going to see a lot of promise and be a catalyst longer term. Fundamentally, in the long term, we see SVOD also anchored to the increasing penetration of fixed broadband services, whether it's through the cable pipe or through the telco pipe, or as Jio gets to invest in fiber to the home or GPON infrastructure, that's going to be an important part. Now, if you deconstruct that market in SVOD, you can already see that Netflix has set a fairly healthy price at the very high upper end, but there's a lot of segmented plays by genres at prices ranging from $1, 1.5 to 3, but as Anil mentioned, you'll probably get lower to sachet pricing. We're also seeing a lot of regional plays and services offering TVOD options at price scales and price rates below $1. And there's also going to be, obviously, the free to subsidized bundled offerings from a lot of the telecom companies playing to get a higher share in the data revenue segment. So just to briefly sum up in India, our views, obviously it's at a very early stage of the market, but it's an incredibly exciting stage. You can broadly classify players in one or two buckets: content and technology companies. And there's a long tail of content players hiring engineers and aspiring to build a digital product, while telcos and other tech companies like Hungama and Savan are all aspiring to aggregate relevant content for their product. Now, while each of these players tries to gain each other's DNA and gain some kind of competitive advantage, I think there are some learnings globally or some themes from Asia Pacific to look at. So here are some of the themes from the other markets. Look, the first thing that's happened in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong and Taiwan is you've had the growth, of these what I would call pan-regional OTT platforms. Hook, which is a Singtel predominantly business with the Hollywood studios, predominantly a lot of Hollywood movie content with some local content. iFlix, which is a Hollywood series product with some local content. Netflix, you all know. And View, which is premium Korean content and some Asian content. Now, all these, because in Southeast Asia, similar to India, the mobile infrastructure is developing, but there's no payment infrastructure in most markets apart from Singapore. There's a lot of piracy. So all these companies have used carrier billing. So they've integrated it with the telcos. The other key thing to remember is in various markets, a lot of the content owners and content producers in these markets are getting frustrated in the broadcast window, in the pay TV window. So they started selling content to these guys. Let me tell you a little bit more on the telco side. So for example, iFlix, the way it works, will give 12 to 18 months away, bundle with broadband, and it's basically recreating the pay TV channel model or the wholesale model on OTT. So the telco will pay it a wholesale fee, and there'll be some marketing cost return, and there'll be a profit margin on that fee. They'll also have some direct subscribers, as Hook, as View, but generally it's not that much. The ad model is not working out, right? View has tried that ex-Hong Kong, which is PCCW's domestic market in Southeast Asia. It's still early days, but that ad model is so deeply embedded for players like YouTube and Facebook, they're cornering that size of the pie. So really, the share of the wallet has to go to subscription, and these are the kind of models. Now, in certain markets, it is developing fast, and it's going to be interesting to see how it develops. But the key thing is the pricing is incredibly low for some of these players. For iFlix, it's about effectively $1 to $2, let's say. Hook, it's $1 to $2. Obviously, Netflix is very high, and View is also very competitive. And we are seeing some levels of consumption going up for that content, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I think the key thing for a content player, particularly for the studios and players, is how does it work out? Netflix did a deal when they launched in Australia, which is their most successful market to date in Asia Pacific. That worked out very well. Free subscription for Netflix with Optus's broadband plays, a certain trial period for that, and then they went pay. And basically, the Australian consumer's argument is, look, I get content when I want it, and I'm happy to pay for it because, I'm paying $90 for pay TV. So, 8 to 9 for predominantly English language content is good for me. iFlix and Telecom Indonesia, it's a much deeper wholesale integration where you're getting 12 to 18 months of iFlix subscription bundled with my broadband subscription. I'm giving you an Indonesian example because it's such an emerging market there. There, you have to do these deals because the customer says, look, why do I need to pay for this content when I can get it for free or I can pirate it? But iFlix's argument is, look, that's how we select our content. We see what's BitTorrented, and we kind of do the deals with the license the deals with the Hollywood players, some local content, and we bundle it with broadband. And as I said, we integrate it. And they are seeing some results. In 6 months since they launched in Indonesia, iFlix has significant amount of subscribers than most pay TV channels in Indonesia have tried for 10 years. So what I'm saying is in 6 months, they've had more subscribers than some of the operators in pay TV have tried in 10 or 15 years in Indonesia. Now, the other thing that obviously you are all well aware of is the kind of emergence of these super aggregators, or what we're seeing is the super app aggregators like Amazon, which aggregates video content from around 25 video services, or Wink in India, which already has 5 players. So it's like a new virtual operator which is prevailing. And so it's kind of giving new models for the gatekeeper of content. Singtel started something similar in Singapore called Cast. It hasn't yet as executed well, so we left it off this slide, but they're trying something similar in Singapore. So a lot of OTT players can leverage their existing relationships and work more collaboratively under this model. Now, the other big thing is a lot of these players that are coming in, domestic scale is important. And as Anil said, there's tons of players in India. It's a much bigger market than some of these other players. But what we're seeing is a shake-up in already in markets. Thailand had 15 OTT platforms, and by the end of this year, it will have 5. Now, these players that I've highlighted here are global companies buying content on a global basis. Amazon, much like YouTube in India, have actually done quite well. And they've, green-lighted a lot of local productions in Japan where they're actually doing exceptionally well. And they're going to do the same in India as they launch. Netflix is obviously a very global content consumption model. A lot of international subscribers, but outside of Asia, outside of Australia, still tiny. And obviously YouTube is a $7 billion plus on advertising. And now Facebook is localizing Facebook video to launch in India and certain Southeast Asia markets. But one of the key things that we believe is from an investor perspective, global scale is often required to drive value creation. A lot of people that come into these funding rounds are interested in what these companies are doing in India, in Indonesia, in Africa, the Middle East, not so much interested in Japan, Australia, mature markets. So someone like iFlix, with barely any revenues, they're now getting a little bit more this year, got a $450 million valuation, just based on its potential reach and driving, as it launches in the Middle East and Africa. It's launched in Sri Lanka now, and Pakistan and Vietnam. It's not launching in India. View will probably get a similar valuation as it extends to Middle East and Africa in 3 markets and goes into other markets. Hook is we're yet to see. Hotstar, we're yet to see as they expand. And Astro, of course, has just launched a thing called Astro Tribe, which has a little bit of sports, a little bit of millennial content, a little bit of Korean content. So global scale is very important for these players because it also helps you to compete on content where you're competing with players like Netflix and YouTube and Amazon on certain things. The other thing is really China, because that's a very important variant when you look at OTT. And I highlight this chart in just comparing between the US and China, just on digital video. So this is the whole OTT, online video advertising ecosystem, online video subscription ecosystem. Now, obviously with the United States, they're certainly going to be at least $15 to $20 billion ahead in terms of China over this big 5-year time frame. But what's significant here is this global expansion of these guys like YouTube, Netflix, Facebook, Amazon Prime across Europe, Asia, Latin America, Africa, and so forth. And that is the opportunity that Chinese players are seeing, and it should be an opportunity that the Indian players should also see to bridge the gap. So you've had a lot of Chinese players now slowly launching, using the scale of their domestic market and launching in other markets. So iQIYI, for example, has done a deal with all the Hollywood studios to launch in Taiwan. Tencent is looking also to launch in Southeast Asia. And I mention all of this because it's very critical as people go to users beyond households that regional content scales. So India will be looking to launch its own OTT platforms, maybe together, maybe separately globally. Korea is already on the way. China is already on the way. So that's another key trend to watch out for. Just very quickly, so you understand what's happening in China. Look, in China, they don't have the subscription model or the kind of relatively relaxed regulatory environment that we have in India. So people hardly paid for anything for pay TV for years and years and years. And they still don't pay for anything for pay TV. It's really a utility bill. But what's happened is as OTT is integrated, people have started paying serious money for OTT. The big difference from India and Southeast Asia is in China, I mean, people are now paying $7 or $8 combined with pay TV and OTT per month in China. The big difference in China is they have payment ecosystems done by the players themselves. So Tencent has their own payment ecosystem, and obviously Alibaba has a very big ecosystem with Alipay. Massive base in China, 900 million online video users. The black bar is really the ad-supported base, but you can see the subscription part is growing quite significantly. If you look at the revenue pie, the online video market in China was close to $10 billion by the end of this year. More than 70% of that is ad-based, but subscription is picking up. And by 21, subscription will get to, around 40% in the ecosystem. And let's look at SVOD, because SVOD is kind of very complex in China. You have the apps and the portals, big players like Tencent and So and iQIYI. So that's growing with scale, maybe 100 million subs over the next 5 years. Then you have these smart set-top boxes, which are integrated. And a lot of the big telcos have rolled them out, and some of the better organized cable companies have rolled them out. And that is starting to see a lot of OTT integration as well. So a lot of tech integration. Then you have the smart TV manufacturers that pre-install the online video apps to the TV sets. That's also growing. And then, of course, the last is the smartphone, which actually, funnily enough, is seeing lesser growth. Now, the key thing is obviously some of this is hard bundled. So when you look at the apps, they have probably the more purest subscription model, whereas the smart TV and the smart TV guys is more kind of content used to sell technology, which is a different way of looking at things. The other key thing to remember in China is that media is small fry for a lot of these companies. These companies, as we've shown, show the top three, what we consider the top three internet companies in China, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And each started out their core businesses in something very different from video. Baidu with search, Alibaba in e-commerce, and Tencent in social messaging and game. But within 5 or 10 years, they're so huge. They all have market caps anywhere between 30 to 50 to 100 billion plus. They've entered into new sectors, finance, payments, travel, and obviously they use that to subsidize their deep investments in content going forward. And as you can see, just in the OTT space now, spend on content is outstripping TV. It'll reach close to $4 billion last year. And historically, they were very reliant on Hollywood content. And recently, they've been very reliant on Korean content. Obviously, with this lot of political tensions between Japan and Korea and China, that might limit that. And there's some issues between China and Hollywood that might limit that. So they've started producing their own content. A lot of the production quality in China is still weak, so Tencent is subsidizing that. They're also acquiring a lot of movies and producing dramas from their local firms, and that part of the content ecosystem is growing in China. Just to round up on the US, on what's happening, I'm not going to dwell too much on the US OTT ecosystem. I just wanted to kind of highlight what's happening from content, which might mirror a little bit on what's happening in India. In content, SVOD is driving a lot of growth in the content marketplace in the US. So by the end of this year, actually this chart is a little bit conservative. It'll be more than $10 billion from these three players that are spending on content. Okay, and out of that, Netflix is around 6. And Netflix is the biggest spender on video content in the US. And you can see that that online video content is driving deep and deep and deep the shows they're doing. I mean, Netflix is going to produce up to 140 shows this year. I think more than 60 series. The rest are films. They've got like 45 new shows coming in this year. So it's almost like a content warehouse. And Hulu and Amazon are slowly catching up. They're doing their different business. And the reason I mention that is the scale of their content investment is such that the other players are really struggling. So, you know, the cable networks that might put 1 or 2 shows on new that a month are suffering relative, say, someone like Netflix that is putting 8 or 9 new shows a month and driving that content investment deep. And as you can see in terms of video consumption, yes, there's a lot of the pay TV operators and other players that have gone authenticated, HBO Now and so forth, but you can still see what's driving and dominating consumption is the top 3 disruptors, right? Netflix, YouTube, Amazon, and so forth. And you can see HBO Now a little bit, you know, further down, and authenticated services, which are the pay TV operators going there. So it's a land grab, and it's all there to play for. Thank you very much.